They handcuffed a 78-year-old Army veteran in broad daylight. What they didn't know was that he was already working with the FBI. Sunday, late afternoon. The kind of hour when the sun starts slipping behind tall pine trees and casts gold across cracked asphalt. Leonard "Lenny" Whitmore had just left Cobb's Hardware on Highway 43, a brown paper bag with a few screws, a fresh quart of oil, and a box of nails resting on the passenger seat of his 2004 Ford Crown Victoria. A car he'd babied for nearly 20 years. He wore his U.S. Army jacket like he always did, zipper halfway up, patches faded, fabric worn down around the elbows. It wasn't for show. It was who he was. Lenny had served in Vietnam. 24 years total in uniform. After retirement, he returned to live in Tuskegee with his wife, until she passed. Now he kept to himself in a little house just outside Reeltown, Alabama. Quiet life, fixed things, cooked simple meals, helped his neighbor's grandson with algebra when he could. As he eased down the two-lane stretch of County Road 14, an old sheriff's cruiser pulled out of a side road behind him. He noticed it in his rear view, but didn't think much of it. Speed limit was 45. He was going 38. But after about a minute, the cruiser's lights came on. Lenny blinked, slowed, signaled, pulled over into the lot of a nearby gas station. It was small, no name, with 2 pumps and a row of folding chairs where old men sometimes gathered for cigarettes and arguments about football. 3 people sat out front. All turned to watch. Lenny turned off the engine, rolled down the window, and waited. His hands rested on the wheel. 2 deputies approached. Both white. One was stocky with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses. The other was taller, younger, with a jaw set like he was chewing invisible gum. Buzzcut leaned in, already suspicious. "You know why we pulled you over?" Lenny replied with measured calm. "No, sir. I don't believe I was speeding." "License and registration," Gum Chewer demanded from the passenger side. Lenny nodded slowly and handed over his wallet and papers. Military-eyed slipped out with them. Gum Chewer snatched it up. "Where'd you get this car?" Buzzcut asked. "It's mine," Lenny said, not raising his voice. "Had it almost 2 decades. I bought it from Johnson Ford up in Opelika." Buzzcut stepped back, looked at the plate, squinted. "You match a description," he muttered. "A description of what?" Lenny asked. "Stolen vehicle. Older black male, driving a brown Ford." Lenny blinked. "That's all it takes now." Buzzcut stiffened. "Step out of the vehicle." "I don't see why." "I said step out." Gum Chewer yanked the door open. Before Lenny could finish unbuckling, hands were on him. He stumbled, and his knees hit the pavement hard. The old army jacket didn't cushion much. One of the gas station chairs scraped across the concrete as a man stood up. Another grabbed a phone. A woman shouted, "What are you all doing? He didn't do anything." "Ma'am, step back," Buzzcut yelled. "I'm filming this," she said. "You hurting that old man?" Handcuffs clicked shut around Lenny's wrists. His breath was steady, but his heart was not. The younger one leaned in, whispered something about teaching respect. Lenny looked up from the ground, eyes sharp. Not afraid, just disappointed. They hoisted him up roughly and shoved him toward the cruiser. Lenny didn't say much after that. He just stared out the window on the ride to the station, watching the trees blur past. His wrists ached. His pride didn't. But the people who saw what happened, they weren't quiet. Word was already moving faster than the patrol car. They walked Lenny through the back door of the Tallapoosa County Sheriff's Office, out of sight from the lobby. Not because it was procedure, but because they didn't want anyone asking questions. The younger deputy, his badge read R. Salters, pushed open a steel door and motioned Lenny inside a holding room. "Sit down," he ordered. Lenny didn't resist. He lowered himself onto the bench slowly, feeling the bruise rising in his knee from the pavement earlier. His wrists were still cuffed behind his back. Deputy Salters stood in the corner, arms crossed, chewing on nothing. The older one, Sergeant Wade Crenshaw, placed Lenny's ID and registration on the table. He gave the army jacket a long look, then scoffed. "Where'd you really get this, huh?" Crenshaw asked, flipping the laminated military ID with a finger. "eBay?" Lenny didn't look at him. "That ID is real. You can check the barcode if you like." Crenshaw stepped closer. "I don't care if it's real. You don't talk back." Salters laughed, but it was dry and uneasy. Crenshaw was enjoying this more than he should have. Even his partner seemed unsure how far it would go. "I served 24 years, Lenny said, voice steady. "You don't have to treat me like a damn criminal." Crenshaw leaned in. "Then maybe act like someone who earned that respect." Lenny met his eyes. No fear, just steel. Respect isn't something you handcuff. Before Crenshaw could respond, the door creaked open again. A young deputy with a shaved head and clipboard poked his head in. "Sergeant, we got a call. Some lady posted a video. It's blowing up. Says y'all roughed up a vet." Crenshaw's jaw tensed. "Let me guess. Gas station on 14. "Yes, sir." Crenshaw glanced at Salters. "How many people saw?" 4 or 5 outside," Salters muttered. "One with a phone. I told her to step back." Crenshaw turned back to Lenny. "You got friends in high places, old man." "I got neighbors who know my name," Lenny said calmly. "And a community that's tired of this." In the lobby, the phones started ringing. First, it was local news. Then someone said a Montgomery civil rights group had tagged the sheriff's office in the video. A local pastor had already reposted it, writing, "This is the face of Alabama justice in 2025. Lenny sat quietly while the buzz outside the door got louder. He could hear murmurs, then footsteps, then the click of a lock being turned. The door opened again. This time it was the sheriff himself. Tall, bald, face red from heat or nerves, or both. Sheriff Glenn McMullen had been in office for 6 years and never once handled a situation like this one. "Get those cuffs off him! Now!" Crenshaw hesitated. "I said now." Salters stepped forward and unlocked the cuffs. Lenny rubbed his wrists but didn't say a word. Sheriff McMullen stepped in. "Mr. Johnson, is it?" Lenny raised an eyebrow. "It's Whitfield." McMullen cleared his throat. "Right, Mr. Whitfield. Let me be very clear. We're going to straighten this out." Lenny looked him in the eye. "You already had your chance." McMullen nodded slowly, as if trying to weigh his words. "You're free to go. There was a mistake. It appears there was a similar vehicle involved in a separate call. My guys here acted on incomplete information." Lenny stood up. "No, Sheriff. They acted on something else." He picked up his army jacket from the table, brushing dust from the sleeve. He didn't rush. He just walked past the 3 men and out the door without another word. Outside, the air felt different. 2 reporters were already standing near the front entrance. One young woman raised her mic when she saw him. "Mr. Whitfield, is it true they accused you of stealing your own car?" He stopped, looked at her, then at the camera, and said only, "You all saw what they did." He walked down the steps and toward his car, which had already been towed and sat in the lot like a forgotten prop. An officer was fumbling with the paperwork to release it. But Lenny wasn't in a rush. He stood quietly, jacket in hand, watching the clouds shift overhead. But inside the station, a new problem was forming, and this one had nothing to do with a gas station video. There were 2 black SUVs headed toward Tallapoosa County, and no one had called for them. Sergeant Crenshaw slammed the break room door shut behind him and muttered something under his breath. He didn't like being corrected, especially not in front of the sheriff, especially not over some old man who should have been more respectful. His words, not anyone else's. Salters sat stiff on the edge of a chair, scrolling through his phone. "The clip's at 30,000 views, he said, voice barely above a whisper. "And folks ain't happy." Crenshaw took a long sip of vending machine coffee. "It'll blow over. These things always do, but it wasn't blowing over." Outside the walls of the station, the story was picking up steam. One repost turned into 5. A national civil rights attorney tweeted it with the caption, "Vietnam vet, arrested like a dog." Alabama still hasn't learned. And it wasn't just Twitter. News vans from Montgomery and Birmingham were en route. The local Endobo ACP chapter had already contacted the mayor's office. In the holding area, Deputy Gray, one of the newer hires, walked past the window and froze mid-step. He leaned forward and stared out toward the front lot. Crenshaw? Salters? Y'all need to see this." The two stepped out and followed Gray down the hall. Outside, just past the squad cars and the busted old station sign, 2 unmarked black SUVs had pulled in. Matte finish. Dark windows. Government plates. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out of the first vehicle. Another followed. Both looked like they hadn't driven a mile. They'd flown in. Suits crisp. Faces unreadable. "Feds," Salters muttered, swallowing. "How the hell they get here so fast?" Crenshaw whispered, suddenly aware of the sweat building on his neck. The agents moved with purpose. They didn't walk like people who were invited. The front desk deputy stood up fast, knocking over a coffee cup. The older agent flashed a badge. "Special Agent Donovan Reeves, Federal Civil Rights Division." The younger one did the same. "Agent Marquez, we're here to speak with your sheriff." Inside his office, McMullen looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last hour. He stood when the agents entered, but didn't offer a handshake. "We received footage and a full incident report regarding Leonard Whitfield," Agent Reeves began, calm but firm. "We need access to the arrest logs, cruiser cam footage, and all internal statements filed since the stop." McMullen blinked. "That's sealed unless you've got federal—" Reeves placed a folder on the desk. "You'll want to read that." McMullen opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the first page, and his jaw moved slightly. Tight, silent movements like he was chewing on regret. He looked up. "You're telling me he's, what, a witness?" "No," Marquez replied. "Mr. Whitfield is a cooperating party in an ongoing federal civil rights investigation involving several departments across 3 counties. That includes Tallapoosa." Salters, now standing in the corner like a schoolboy caught cheating, paled. "We didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," Reeves replied. "But now you're part of the report." They didn't yell. They didn't threaten. They didn't have to. Reeves motioned toward the monitor behind McMullen's desk. "Pull up cruiser cam from today. We want to see how your guys matched that description." Crenshaw shifted. "The footage won't show. We'll see for ourselves," Marquez said, cutting him off. 10 minutes later, the video played back in real time. The dashboard view showed Lenny's car pulling over. Then came the moment his door opened and Salters yanked him out. No resistance, no raised voice. Just an old man trying to brace himself from hitting the ground. Reeves paused the video and leaned back in his chair. "That was a federal witness you put in cuffs. You manhandled someone on our active list. If anything had happened to him while in your custody." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Outside the door, Gray watched through the window, wide-eyed. He whispered to the deputy next to him, "We're in deep, huh?" But it wasn't we. Not yet. Because what happened next would change who got dragged under, and who was left pointing fingers. By the time the agents finished watching the cruiser cam and securing the footage, half the department was in disarray. Some pretended to stay busy at their desks. Others just waited, hoping not to be called in. Crenshaw had retreated to the restroom, running cold water over his face like it could wash off what he'd done. Agent Reeves closed the file folder with a firm snap and handed it to Agent Marquez. Sheriff McMullen stayed seated, not saying much. He wasn't the type to admit fault, but the pressure in that room made denial a luxury he couldn't afford. "You said he was helping you?" the sheriff asked, voice quieter now. "He gave us testimony," Marquez replied, slipping the file into a slim black case. Details about stops he witnessed in and around Tallapoosa. How often certain people got pulled over. Who did the pulling. He was keeping notes for us. Dates, times, badge numbers. McMullen rubbed his forehead. "Why would you pick him?" Why put an old man in that spot? Reeves answered plainly. Because he volunteered. Because he's tired of this town talking change, but practicing the same old routine. And because he's got the kind of memory a courtroom believes. McMullen said nothing. Marquez stood and looked over toward Crenshaw's empty seat. We're going to need statements from Deputies Crenshaw and Salters. Today, I'll get them, McMullen muttered. But I'll tell you now, they're going to try to spin it. Reeves stepped toward the door. They can say what they want. The camera doesn't lie. Just as the agents prepared to leave, another voice came from the hallway. It was Deputy Gray, knocking gently on the open door. Sir, there's someone out front asking to speak to you. Who? McMullen asked, already dreading the answer. Gray hesitated. Name's Brenda Lattimore. Says she's the one who filmed the arrest. Marquez glanced at Reeves. She's faster than we thought. Reeves nodded. We'll take it from here. Brenda stood in the lobby, clutching her phone like a weapon. She was 45, worked nights at the local hospital, and had never had a reason to walk inside a sheriff's office before. But today wasn't about comfort. It was about conscience. Agent Reeves approached first. Ms. Lattimore, she lifted her chin. You hear about Mr. Whitfield? Yes, ma'am. We saw your footage. We'd like to make a copy and take a brief statement if you're willing. Brenda looked past him, toward the glass where deputies stood, trying not to look like they were listening. He's a good man. I've known him for years. Always waved when he passed. Always helped folks. What they did to him? That's not law enforcement. That's bullying in uniform. We agree, Marquez said. She handed over her phone. It's already online, but I saved the full file. Didn't cut anything. Reeves took it, careful and respectful. You may have just saved someone's life. Brenda looked him in the eye. He saved mine once. Long time ago, when my boy was real sick. Paid for our groceries when I couldn't. I told him I'd pay him back someday. Looks like you did. Outside the station, word continued to spread. A few people had started gathering across the street, holding signs. Nothing organized yet, but it was building. One sign read, Justice for Mr. Whitfield. Back inside, Salters finally sat down with Agent Marquez for his official statement. Hands in his lap, voice low, eyes never quite meeting the agent's. I didn't know who he was, he muttered. Crenshaw said he matched a description. I just followed his lead. Marquez didn't respond right away. Then she asked, Did you think it made sense? What he said about the car? Salters swallowed hard. No, I didn't. But I didn't think I had the right to question it. That's your job, she said. To question what doesn't make sense. Salters sat in silence. Crenshaw, when it was his turn, was less cooperative. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. This whole thing's blown out of proportion. We got a tip, we acted. I didn't lay a hand on that man that wasn't procedure. Reeves raised an eyebrow. Procedure says you throw a 78-year-old on the pavement? He resisted. Reeves slid the paused cruiser cam image across the table. Lenny's face, mid-fall, frozen in the frame. He didn't. Crenshaw didn't say another word. But outside, the tension wasn't dying down. It was catching flame. And someone unexpected was about to fan it. That night, the clip from Brenda's phone aired on the evening news. Not just local anymore. CBS picked it up. Then NBC. Then a push alert from the Washington Post called it another disturbing example of excessive force in the Deep South. Lenny hadn't planned to watch it. He didn't like attention. Never had. But his neighbor's teenage son, Deshawn, ran over just after sunset. Mr. Lenny, you're on TV. Lenny opened the door in his slippers and shook his head. I didn't do nothing special. Deshawn insisted. No, for real. They talking about what happened. They got your name and that lady's video and everything. Lenny didn't say much. Just walked back inside, sat on the edge of his old couch, and stared at the TV as the clip played again. There he was, on the ground, cuffs around his wrists, blood on the sleeve of his army jacket. The anchor's voice narrated calmly. Leonard Whitfield, a 78-year-old Vietnam veteran, was arrested after deputies accused him of stealing his own vehicle. Federal agents later confirmed that Mr. Whitfield was cooperating in an ongoing civil rights investigation. Deshawn sat next to him, wide-eyed. "You was working with the FBI?" Lenny turned the volume down. "They came to me. Wanted someone who remembered what this town used to be. Someone who's seen the same names doing the same things year after year. You never told nobody." "Wasn't supposed to." Outside Lenny's house, headlights slowed. A car idled for a moment, then rolled away. Second time that night. Lenny noticed, but didn't say a word. The next morning, Agent Reeves and Agent Marquez returned to the station. Not for interviews this time, but to deliver notice. Crenshaw had been placed on immediate suspension. Salters was under internal review. Sheriff McMullen had agreed, reluctantly, to release a public statement. They read it at noon, just outside the station. Cameras lined the sidewalk. Brenda stood among the crowd. McMullen stepped up to the mic. "There was a failure in judgment, an error in action. Mr. Whitfield did not deserve to be treated the way he was. We're cooperating fully with federal investigators, and steps are being taken to ensure accountability." No apology, just a vague acknowledgement and some bureaucratic phrases. But the town saw through it. A voice from the crowd cut through the silence. "He's been here longer than you," another added. "If that was your granddaddy, would you call it a failure in judgment?" McMullen didn't respond, just walked back inside, head down. Later that week, a full timeline of the incident was published. It confirmed what the community suspected. Lenny was never part of any active suspect description. No car matching his had been reported stolen. Crenshaw made the call based on a vague tip that never matched the vehicle, the location, or the driver. What made it worse was the revelation from a source inside the department, a young deputy who came forward anonymously. He told federal investigators that Crenshaw had a long history of pulling over black drivers, especially elderly men. He'd say stuff like, "Old ones don't fight back," the deputy claimed. "Told us not to bother writing full reports. Just say they looked suspicious and move on." The department tried to do damage control, but the damage was done. People weren't just angry. They were done being quiet. Church groups organized a march. Veterans from nearby counties showed up in uniform to support Lenny. Dozens stood outside the sheriff's office, some holding signs, some in silent prayer. An old man even showed up with a folded flag and placed it on the station steps. It wasn't just about Lenny anymore. It was about every name they'd buried, every story no one believed, every bruise that healed in silence. Lenny didn't speak publicly during the protests. He stood near the back, arms folded, jacket on. Brenda stood beside him, camera still in hand. "You all right?" she asked. "I've been worse," he said. "But maybe they won't forget this one so fast." But one final push was coming, one that wouldn't come from the streets, or the agents, or even the media. It was going to come from Lenny himself. The sheriff's office tried to keep things quiet, but it was too late for that. The internet doesn't have a back button. Once people had seen Lenny thrown to the ground like trash, the conversation had shifted, and it wasn't going back. Within days, national outlets were circling. Podcasts debated the footage. One panel on a morning talk show brought in a retired military colonel who broke down in tears on live TV, saying, "We're watching our elders, our soldiers, our teachers, treated like criminals by people who should be protecting them." Lenny's name was now in the mouths of strangers. People he didn't know wrote him letters. Some thanked him for standing tall. Some sent photos of their grandfathers who'd served in Vietnam, Korea, even Iraq. Others just said, "I'm sorry. We saw what they did to you. You didn't deserve that." At the department, the air was thick. Salters stopped coming in altogether. Officially, he was on leave. Unofficially, he was hiding. Word got out that he'd tried to get ahead of the story, told Internal Affairs he didn't agree with how Crenshaw handled the arrest. But the footage said otherwise. He stood there, watched, helped. Crenshaw, meanwhile, lawyered up. He wasn't suspended anymore. He was fired. No ceremony, no send-off. Just a letter and a warning that he might face federal charges. Sheriff McMullen called a press conference to try and get ahead of the storm. It didn't go well. He stood behind the podium, shirt collar stiff, tie too tight. This department is committed to reviewing its practices. We take these matters seriously and will conduct internal audits and retraining sessions moving forward. Someone from the crowd called out, "That ain't an apology!" A second voice added, "You didn't fire him because it was wrong. You fired him because y'all got caught." McMullen looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. Meanwhile, Lenny remained quiet. He didn't want the spotlight, but the pressure was building from all sides. Journalists camped outside his house. Neighbors dropped off food. Local pastors stopped by to offer prayer, solidarity, and quiet thanks. Finally, after a week of silence, Lenny agreed to speak. At his church. Not on TV, not on social media, just in a room with folding chairs, worn hymnals, and people who knew his story before the country ever cared. He stepped to the pulpit in his Sunday jacket, not the army one this time, and adjusted the mic. He didn't need notes, just memory. "I've been pulled over more times than I can count," he said. "They see an old black man behind the wheel of a decent car, and suddenly it's a problem." Heads nodded. "I've been called every name you can think of. I've been searched, questioned, pushed, told to keep quiet. But never in my life have I been thrown on the ground like I was nothing, like I was a threat, like I didn't matter." His voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It just carried. "I fought for this country, and when I came back, I had to fight again just to be seen as a man. Still am. I didn't ask for this spotlight. But maybe it's time we stop pretending it's just bad apples. Maybe it's the whole tree that needs pruning." The room stayed silent. Nobody clapped. Nobody shouted. They just listened. Lenny closed with one sentence. "If they think I'm too old to stand up, they ain't been watching." The video of his speech, recorded by a young choir member, went viral. Again. And with that, the pressure shifted. Not just to the sheriff's office, but to the State House. A local representative announced plans to introduce a bill requiring mandatory body cams in all departments, no exceptions. A group of veterans demanded public oversight boards for law enforcement. People started asking hard questions. Some tried to spin it, say it was overblown. But when faced with the image of a veteran face down on the pavement, arms wrenched behind his back, their words felt thin. But Lenny had one more thing to say, and this time he wasn't going to let anyone else speak for him. 2 weeks after the incident, Lenny sat across from journalist Tara Mendel in a modest studio in Birmingham. No flashing lights, no elaborate set. Just 2 chairs, a table, and a pitcher of water. Tara didn't want a spectacle. She wanted a conversation. They'd asked Lenny several times before, and each time he'd said no. But now, with pressure mounting and voices growing louder, he figured it was time to speak for himself. Not through a headline, not through agents, not even through Brenda's lens. His own voice, on his terms. Tara hit record. "You okay with just starting?" she asked gently. Lenny gave a small nod. "Go ahead." She leaned in, elbows on the table. "Mr. Whitfield, everyone saw what happened to you. But what I want to know is, what did it feel like in that moment?" He paused, eyes fixed on the table for a moment. "You ever been embarrassed for no reason?" he asked quietly. "Not because you did something wrong, but because someone decided you didn't belong." Tara said nothing. Let the silence hang. That's what it felt like. Humiliation. Not for the handcuffs. Not even for the way they talked to me, but for what it said about what this country still thinks of men like me. "You mean veterans?" she asked. "I mean black men," he replied, calm and without hesitation. "Black veterans, black grandfathers, black men who don't smile when they're told to. I served this country, buried brothers overseas, took orders I didn't agree with, and kept quiet when I came home to separate bathrooms." Tara nodded slowly. "People keep saying thank you for your service, like it's a shield," he continued. "But when they see me walking down the street, I'm not a vet. I'm not a hero. I'm just some old black man driving a car that looks too clean. Were you angry?" "No," he said simply. "I was tired. Tired of being asked to prove I belong here. I'm 78 years old. I don't have time to be angry. But I do have time to be honest." She leaned in slightly. What do you want people to take away from this? Lenny looked directly into the camera for the first time. I want them to stop pretending this stuff just happens. It's not a glitch. It's how the system was built. And we can't fix it if folks keep acting surprised every time it does what it was designed to do. He folded his hands on the table. His tone softened. I ain't asking for sympathy. I'm asking for memory. I want people to remember what they saw when the story fades. Remember who was quiet, who made excuses, who looked away. Because this ain't just about me. Tara let the silence sit again, heavy and necessary. You ever think about leaving? She asked finally. Lenny smiled. Barely. This is my home. I got my wife buried here, got trees I planted 30 years ago. I'm not running. I've been here longer than most of the deputies in that building. Why should I be the one to leave? He glanced to the side, then back. But if folks think I'm going to sit quiet next time, they picked the wrong vet. The interview aired the next night. Unedited. Raw. No music, no dramatic lighting. Just words. And the weight of them. And something shifted. People who'd been unsure, silent, skeptical, afraid of picking sides, finally started speaking up. Even some in law enforcement reached out quietly, offering apologies, reflections, shared regret. It wasn't a tidal wave, but it was real. At Sunday service the following weekend, Pastor Jensen paused before the final hymn. He looked out at the pews, many of which were fuller than usual. We don't need a martyr, he said. We need to listen to the living. Mr. Whitfield is here today, and I think we ought to listen. The church stood in unison. Lenny didn't stand, didn't wave. He just tipped his head, hands folded in his lap. Not for attention, but because he was still here. But before we close, there was one more surprise waiting for Lenny, and it came from someone he never expected. 3 days after the interview aired, Lenny's front door creaked open just after noon. He'd been sitting on his porch, as usual, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug his late wife had made back in '92. He liked the quiet. It gave him room to think. But that day, he wasn't alone for long. A sedan rolled up his driveway. Not a cruiser, not a news van, just a modest grey Nissan with out-of-state plates. The driver stepped out, a young man, late 20s maybe, short haircut, tan slacks, and a navy blue polo with a small Department of Justice logo over the chest. Lenny narrowed his eyes but didn't get up. He figured if someone came all that way, they could do the walking. The man approached, extending a hand. Mr. Whitfield, I'm Curtis Daniels. I work out of the D.C. office. Lenny didn't take the hand. Not out of rudeness, just habit. What brings you down this far? Daniels looked genuinely nervous. I just wanted to deliver something personally. And say thank you. He reached into his bag and pulled out a framed letter, on thick paper with the seal of the Department of Justice at the top. Lenny accepted it slowly, reading each line, his brow furrowed. At the bottom, a signature. The U.S. Attorney General. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't for show. It was an official letter acknowledging Lenny's assistance in a multi-agency civil rights investigation, one that now spanned 4 counties, 3 departments, and over a dozen officers under review. They're listening now, Daniels said quietly. Because you were willing to speak up. Lenny placed the letter in his lap. He didn't smile, but there was a softness in his face that hadn't been there for weeks. You tell your people, Lenny said slowly. This ain't about recognition. It's about respect. Folks like me, we didn't survive this long to be treated like suspects in our own hometown. Daniels nodded. We understand. And we're working on it. Lenny looked out at the trees swaying beyond the edge of his yard. Just make sure you finish the job. Daniels left a few minutes later. Lenny sat there another hour. The next morning, he mailed the letter to his niece in Ohio, told her to keep it safe. I don't need it on the wall, he wrote in a note. I need it to mean something. That weekend, the town of Reeltown held a small gathering in the park. No banners, no cameras, just folks. Brenda brought lemonade. Pastor Jensen said a few words. A little boy gave Lenny a handmade card that read, Thank you for not giving up. Lenny stood under the shade of a pecan tree and looked around. There was laughter, conversation, faces he hadn't seen in years. You think it's really changing? Brenda asked, stepping beside him. Lenny shrugged. Change don't come in waves, comes in drops. You don't see it right away. But over time, the bucket fills. She smiled. I'll take that. He turned to her. You the reason this started rolling, you know. You stood up when it counted. Brenda laughed. You kidding? I was shaking the whole time. Thought they were going to take my phone and run me off. But you didn't run. Neither of them said anything for a while after that. As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the park grass, Lenny sat on a bench and watched kids toss a football. A young mother helped her daughter fix a twisted braid. Two teens debated which soda tasted better. And for once, nobody was staring at him. Nobody was asking questions. Just living. And maybe that's what he'd fought for all along. Not praise, not awards, just a world where he could sit in peace and not have to prove himself to anyone. That night, as he folded his army jacket and placed it on the chair by the door, Lenny looked at the empty spot on the wall where the letter could have gone. Then he glanced out the window, nodded once to the dark sky, and turned out the light. Some stories end quietly, but they still echo. Lenny's wasn't just a story about what happened, it was about what shouldn't keep happening. And maybe, if we're listening, this time we won't forget so fast. If this story moved you, take a second to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's keep this conversation going, for Lenny, and for every voice that still hasn't been heard.